A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Our usual Monday update on the week's political agenda with the Australian Christian Lobby. Let's check in with Michelle Pearse, who is the CEO at the ACL. There's a whole range of issues that we'd be interested to hear from Michelle all about. Michelle Pearse, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thanks, Neil. It's great to be with you.
Hey, Michelle, let's start with what is international, global impact. Of course, Hamas expected to release the 20 living hostages to Israel this morning, and it might even be happening even as we're speaking. There'll be some breaking news coming through around about this. What have you been thinking about? A general overview of what's been going on?
Yeah, it's absolutely a reason for celebration, and I know our Jewish people all over the globe are celebrating this today, and just hopeful that they actually pull it off. But I think it's just good to keep in mind that it's not over yet. Today is significant in pulling off this release, but this week and the ongoing negotiations that Trump has between Hamas and Netanyahu, Hamas on the disarmaments and Netanyahu on the ceasefire. This is absolutely critical. And then they have to set up the interim authority to replace Hamas in Gaza. So this is where the real challenge is, and this is what we need to continue to pray over. We need to just pray that all of the pieces fall into place, into the creation of this interim government. So although today is hopefully everything goes according to plan, we do need to continue to pray for this ongoing peace in the Middle East.
And of course, as you say, Donald Trump, he's actually, I think he must be there in Israel, even now as we speak. He's then preparing to fly to Egypt for a summit of world leaders on the Gaza war. I mean, this idea that we have as Christian believers, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, that's actually really important right in this moment, do you think?
It's critical, and it's good to know what to pray for, and that's why I thought it was just good to highlight that the negotiations are going on this week, as you said, in Egypt. The President of France is going in, the UK Prime Minister will be there as well. So the world's watching, and I think that this move today has been brought about by prayer, and we just can't give up. We've got to keep praying for a real breakthrough in this terrible conflict. We don't want a continued war. Israel has made some ground in Gaza, but nobody wants to see the continued obliteration of Palestine.
Now, Donald Trump actually has declared the war is over. I think there might be a few cynics out there saying, well, just wait and see. There's a whole lot of things that might still be unanswered. But I wonder if you've got any thought here around the fact that there are people on our streets here in Australia who, over the weekend, were on the streets, pro-Palestine protests. Yesterday in a number of state capitals, there appears to be a continued move, even though there's a declaration the war is over. Any thoughts from your end on that?
Well, we see the contrast with the Jewish people gathering in peace, and then contrasted to the Palestinians and the way that they're behaving on our streets is you can see the difference in the way that both groups are approaching the issue, and that should speak volumes in itself. We certainly have a cultural challenge in our nation where we're seeing this massive political divide. So, and those tensions will continue even after this conflict. There will be bigger challenges that we're facing, on our own doorstep, and certainly within our nation in terms of the protection of our national culture. And this conflict has only highlighted the divisions in our nation. They're not going to go away without an effort in policy, and certainly, Christians across the nation praying and seeking God as to how we address these issues in our own nation.
Michelle, lots of issues going on here on our shores, and there's a lot of international issues like that that do dominate headlines. Let's come back to some of the things that are happening in the various states here in Australia. Victoria, where the Victorian Treaty with First Peoples, there's some concerns there from the ACL. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is not unlike The Voice, and 54% of Victorians actually voted against The Voice. It's setting up a powerful Indigenous body that would effectively operate as a third chamber in the Victorian Parliament. So this group would hold the government to account for the implementation of this treaty. It's very similar to what The Voice was trying to do, yet this is an unelected body that's going to have significant influence on the parliamentary process, and it's simply undemocratic that the Victorian government has forced this through and is now in the stage of implementing it without giving Victorians the opportunity to have their say on it. Some of the changes that they're looking at, or that has come through the recommendations through this process, has been a rewriting of the Australian history that would be taught in the school curriculum, imposing a separate education framework for Indigenous children, which means that Indigenous children would actually receive different consequences for their actions than non-Indigenous children. If you can remember, a massive argument in the Voice campaign was this division of treating two different races with two different sets of rules, or approaching them like different, a different hierarchy in a sense. And so this is really problemsome for Victoria in treating these two different groups of people completely differently. They're enforcing Indigenous quotas on boards and companies. We've long shared our concerns with DEI policy, and that's what this is looking to do. And then one of the concerning things for the church is there's this demand within the UROC recommendations to demand the churches to hand over land or share land sale profits with the Indigenous community. So it's extraordinary, these types of changes that are being proposed, and for the Victorian government to be proceeding with these without going to the Victorian people is quite an arrogant move for them to make.
It seems to be there's a criticism that there's a lack of transparency, and when it comes to all political leadership, there's a need for transparency. Otherwise, when you've got leaders that look, they're doing tricky, sneaky things behind the scenes, not letting you know the details, drip feeding things one little bit at a time. It seems to be that might be what the Allen government is doing. But this lack of transparency, as you say, like a repackaging of The Voice. Then there's also the other dimensions like truth-telling in schools' curriculum. Those sorts of things. Are people, do you think, generally aware that that's what they're getting into along this line of having this treaty?
Well, I think they don't know what it means, and they don't know how much it's going to affect them. But when you're having the curriculum change in a way that children understand the foundations of our nation, and even taking away those good parts that the British brought in upon settlement, and completely focusing it in one direction, really makes children resent our history and resent everything that's happened, and resent their place in Australia as well, and that can have really negative consequences for who we are and our ongoing culture, and celebrating our nation, and holding celebrations on things like Australian Day, valuing who we are as a nation and the positive things. Yes, there were some terrible things that have happened, but that shouldn't completely discount the good that has been done through the centuries, the churches that have been established since the founding of our nation. And
that whole issue with churches needing to share proceeds from land and those sorts of things, that's gone pretty well under the radar too, hasn't it, as part of what's being proposed?
Yeah, and it is a proposal. It hasn't been accepted yet, and I think if that was looked at seriously, there would certainly be more noise around it. But I think because there is just so many recommendations that are controversial, it's difficult to sort of grab a hold of which ones the media will focus on. But it is a real threat, because these are recommendations that have been developed over a number of years, that if this, as this treaty is now in place, the government will be looking through each of these recommendations one by one. So I hope that when that comes to the table, there is an outcry about that.
Michelle Pearse leads the Australian Christian Lobby. Let's stay in Victoria for a few minutes here. There's some other things that are going on. Your ACL State Director in Victoria, Jasmine Ewan, she's running some concerned parents events regarding gender ideology in schools. What's she up to?
Yeah, so we held a forum in Victoria just a couple of weeks ago. We had over 100 parents come, and this was calling parents to come together that are concerned about the sex and relationships education in schools. And this followed a letter that was sent that received, thousands of signatures in relation to concern over these programs. And at this forum, we had parents actually share their testimonies of what they've experienced through their children in schools. We heard stories of children being bullied for dissenting from this ideology. One child was targeted and then excluded by peers for disagreeing with the gender ideology. We had heard stories of schools reinforcing this ideology with gender-confused children. Instead of addressing other mental health needs. And that's what we're seeing with this issue, is a push on ideology, but then a refusal to really deal with other significant issues that a child may be dealing with that is leading to their gender confusion. Jasmine shared about a 10-year-old boy who was forced to sit through a trans lesson despite begging to leave. Victoria's having an election next year, and I just hope that these issues will be front and centre. I think not only the 100 parents that came, but there are thousands of parents that are concerned about this ideological education.
And Michelle, when we use those words indoctrination and sexualisation of children, we're seeing that happening through the school's curriculum. I'm wondering whether, how do you start to, maybe water that down, get it out of the system, because parents don't seem to have a whole lot of say in what happens in the government curriculum in Victorian schools. Is there some concern there? Are there parents that need to rise to the occasion, maybe push their way into the way these sorts of things are implemented?
The more voices that we have, the greater our chances of success. Parents need to be telling their stories. I understand with this particular forum, parents don't want to be, revealed who they are. They're obviously concerned about their children and their the perception of them in the school. But even if we have anonymous voices, still it's voices that are speaking out and saying what's going on. In the Australian today, there was actually an article about the mature minor policy in Victoria, and this is a policy that allows kids to socially transition in school without their parents' consent. I think parents are really concerned about this. So that within the school policy, the teachers, the education staff have to affirm a child who wants to socially transition to be the other gender. But it was good in the Australian this morning. It reported that this social transition often leads to medical transition, which we know is true. The medical transition is proven to be dangerous, have serious side effects. I mean, we all know this. But there's also no evidence to say that the social transitioning of a child actually improves their mental health. I mean, from a Christian worldview, we know this to be true because it's a child rejecting who they were created to be. This isn't going to be good for them. But finally, there is more and more evidence. There's more and more research being done to show this is dangerous for the child. This doesn't address their mental health issues. It actually makes it worse for them.
Wow. Hey, let's look around some of the other states and territories. A little bit of a focus to the Northern Territory, where they've got some proposed euthanasia laws. These ones, considered to be like the worst in the nation. What's happening in the Territory?
Yeah, it's surprisingly the most radical bill we've seen. I thought it couldn't get worse than some of the other jurisdictions, but this is terrible. It seems to take all the worst bits of the legislation from all the other jurisdictions in Australia and just packages them together in this one bill. There's things like, ACL doesn't agree with euthanasia at all, so we would try to advocate for as many restrictions as possible to ensure that it's used in very limited circumstances. But this really opens it up for people, even without physical suffering, even with no prognosis, of time frame to death to be able to access it. So that's one thing. There's no prognosis required. In other jurisdictions, there's like a 6 to 12 month prognosis to death, for people that are considering euthanasia. This is no time frame required. And there is a clause in there for anticipated or expected physical or mental suffering. So physical suffering, some people understand, because if somebody is in excruciating pain, they can understand why they would want to go through with euthanasia. Even though we see that there's palliative care measures that can be taken to alleviate that physical suffering. But this one allows for the mental suffering as well, people going through mental suffering to access euthanasia. And that is so subjective. Another example of a subjective statement within a law that shouldn't be subjective. So if somebody is suffering extreme depression or anxiety or whatever related to their illness, that this makes them, they can take an assisted suicide pill simply for mental suffering. And what it does is it changes the focus of the medical professionals from helping to alleviate their mental suffering to simply giving them an easy way out. It's terribly compromising for medical professionals. Some other things which are real concern for Christian medical practitioners is that conscientious objectors, those who would object to the practice, will be required to refer on to somebody who will, have that euthanasia conversation with them. And that's opposed to actually refusing to partake in the conversation at all. So conscientious objectors usually don't want to even have the conversation, but this will require them to refer them to someone who will have that conversation. And that's really compromising for some practitioners. And there's also just the last one. Sorry, I know there's a few things. The last one that I'll mention is the no gag clause. In some jurisdictions, doctors are prohibited for initiating the conversation on suicide, so you can't bring it up in a medical appointment. But this won't exist in this bill. So doctors are able to bring up the subject of assisted suicide within their appointments with their patients. So all of that is very dangerous. This bill needs to be heavily amended, if not thrown out altogether. And it's really dangerous for the Northern Territory, and especially when they have so many other health issues in the nation. In the territory, things that they should be spending their money on to improve. They're deciding to go down this path of spending their money on an assisted suicide program.
Yes, a very slippery slope. One of the positives, no doubt, is that, as I understand it, MPs will be granted a conscience vote. Now, when that's the case, it's up to people like you and your team at the Australian Christian Lobby going into bat, talking about some Christian biblical levels of foundation that will be good for the society and not evil towards the society. There's a real reason there for listeners listening in right now to be supportive of the good moves of the Australian Christian Lobby when it comes to what's developing there in the Northern Territory. Very quickly here, in New South Wales, calls for a mandatory shutdown of pokies between 4 a.m. and 10 a.m. That's come from the Greens, and the ACL is supporting that. Very quickly, Michelle, any thoughts here as to what ought to happen with pokies?
Yeah, I mean, problem gambling causes a huge amount of harm in our communities. And so any reforms aimed at reducing that harm we'll support. So the Greens have actually introduced this bill in New South Wales to enforce this mandatory shutdown period. And this is a very basic kind of reform, but it's a good place to start because pokie machines were never meant to operate 24/7. But exemptions have actually been granted to clubs during the last 20 years, and these exemptions have never been reviewed. So they've been allowed to operate under these exemptions. They've never been reviewed. Meanwhile, Liquor and Gaming New South Wales were tasked with reducing gambling harm. They were the ones who should have been reviewing these exemptions, but they haven't. And so I hope that this bill does get support because it's absolutely necessary that there is this period where pokies are closed, where people that are addicted can't go and continue to gamble their money away. It's unacceptable when you think about the social cost. The Guardian actually reported ACL as, it said ACL in an unholy alliance with the Greens, because ACL doesn't usually support things that come from the Greens. But I told the reporter that ACL is non-partisan. We're not any colour. We support good bills no matter where they come from, and we actually applaud the Greens for addressing this important social issue, because problem gambling really is destroying lives. New South Wales has the highest rate of problem gambling, and urgent reform really is needed. So we were asking our supporters in New South Wales to give their support to the Greens for this bill.
Supporting a good idea, no matter where it's come from, and I think some honour to you at the ACL. Very, very quickly, in WA, surrogacy laws. There's a push to make it easier, but that comes with some real dangers too. Very quickly, Michelle, what's going on in WA?
So, and this push is going on all around the nation. There is a push to make surrogacy as easy to access as possible, but this is incredibly dangerous. When we've seen, surrogacy go uninhibited, there's no police checks or working with children's checks on those that go through with surrogacy or try to obtain a surrogate. We've seen babies brought into families, or there was a Queensland couple who had a surrogate child created for the purpose of then sexually abusing and then trafficking that child. We have a couple who were a baby was born through surrogacy that ended up having Down syndrome. But one of the members of the couple had 22 child sex abuse convictions. And so it's terrible, the kinds of consequences that arise from surrogacy. It lowers the age of the surrogate from 25 to 18. It allows for the advertising, for the recruitment of surrogates. It makes it much easier for a couple to obtain a child through surrogacy through an overseas arrangement. Commercial surrogate arrangements are currently illegal, but this will happen with an overseas surrogacy arrangement. This happens anyway. The law's not enforced. Women are exploited in commercial surrogacy arrangements through traffickers. This isn't a good plan. It's selfish in the sense of doing what we can to allow infertile couples in Australia to have babies, but it's at the expense of vulnerable women on our doorstep in Asia. So we've got to seriously consider the consequence of this and really continue to advocate against surrogacy arrangements.
Well, there's a lot of issues and they're all complicated. And Michelle, honour to you and the team at the Australian Christian Lobby. You're in the mix. You're getting involved. You're bringing a biblical Christian position into these things, trying to keep a level of you might call it common sense, but protection for people right around our nation. Thank you so much, Michelle Pearse, for another great update today. You can connect with Michelle at the Australian Christian Lobby, acl.org.au. That's acl.org.au. Michelle, thanks so much for the update.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.